Hi, welcome to the sample synthesizer presentation. For this presentation, I'm going to be using Pigments and Pigments version 7, which is the latest release at the time I'm actually making this. So you can get this synthesizer from Arturia.com directly. A lot of times they'll have a sale. It's usually, I think, $199, just about $200, and they usually have a sale for 50% off. So that brings it down to $100, which is still kind of pricey. But there are other ways to get it. You can actually get, I think, an older version. I'm not sure if that's upgradable through Splice Rent to Own. So you could pay some money, $10 a month or whatever it is, and over time own it. It does run on either Mac or Windows as either a standalone or as a plugin. As you can kind of see from the border that I have around it, I kind of did that on purpose. So you can see that I'm actually running it in Ableton Live right now. But it could run alone as a standalone, or it can run as any VST or AU or AAX plugin. The requirements would be any kind of modern computer. It does tend to run on things besides modern computers, but when they're adding more and more features, it's becoming a little sluggish on older machines. So I am going to, because of the nature of this plugin, I'm going to jump to the last question now, which is, how does it sound? Because when this first opens, unless you've already had it on this view, which is the old view, it has a new view called Play, and it kind of just encourages you to play the sound. So if you can hear this, I'm playing the welcome sound, which is just that. Very basic to start somewhere. But if you go up to this menu, it has them categorized as all the sounds: bass sounds, brass sound, drums, piano. It's a very versatile synth that can cover a lot of bases, no pun intended. But it does analog sounds, it does kind of sampling-based sounds, it does FM synthesis type things, it does granular synthesis. So there's a lot of things that this synth can do. I'll give you just a quick taste. They have bass sounds. So we have, just regular old aggressive squared bass like that. You have kind of respaces, brass and winds, just some sample sounds. It does some drums, which it's expensive computationally synth to just put on drum tracks, but you could always render the track as audio and then be done. So if we do, there's sustained drums. There are, I think this one was just a kind of emulation of a more acoustic drum. There are electric pianos, good old Herbie Hancock. So there are some keys, lots of different keys. There's something that I thought would be more of a fat analog sound, which is kind of an interesting sound, but you can kind of get a sense of just the kind of range that this synth has. Here's another distorted lead. Organ sounds are fairly, straightforward organ, or something kind of crazy. And then there's pad sounds, piano type sounds. There's sequenced, which just means that it uses the built-in sequencer to kind of give it a little bit of life more than just a static sound. Sound effects, bunch of those, strings, etc. So they do also give template sounds. So you can go from this and actually kind of build your own preset if you want. I'm going to go back to the welcome sound since that's pretty mellow and pretty generic, and kind of go through the rest of the presentation. On this play panel, you have just some basic controls that you might want to use if you're using this in play mode and you're not diving deep, but we are going to dive deep. So in this synth, gets to the next question, what type of oscillators? Well, there are two engines, they call them, because each engine is capable of 5 different types of synthesis. So you have analog synthesis, which is just basically standard waveforms, so just our generic basic waveforms. You have, and I should say there's 3 of them in each engine. You have wavetable, where you can position anywhere along that wave shape, a wavetable, I should say, and there's a bunch of different wavetables. There's, if I pull up something kind of crazy, that's your oscillator right there. There are sample-based approaches, so you have lots of samples and you could load up 6 different samples and have them round robin, or you could just play some, or so there's different ways to work with that. There's harmonic, which is basically additive synthesis at its finest. You're adding a bunch of waveforms together, a bunch of sine waves together, and you are being able to add them as you go. So you can kind of see them when I play them, and you could reduce them, which you're saying, well, that's kind of like a filter. Well, yes, except we're not filtering something it's actually creating it with fewer harmonics to begin with. And then there's modal synthesis, which is more of like physical modeling, and it's actually, we can change that so it's a little bit more sounding like a struck or a bowed instrument. So there's 2 of those samples, and there's a utility engine where I can turn on or off noise, and then a third oscillator, or a third source, which is an oscillator. So there's that. If I go back to analog, kind of generate, I can turn on some of these and turn them up. And then I could kind of create something that's starting to sound a little bit more complicated. Or let me go down. There we go. That sounds kind of good for basic. And then I can add the noise, volume, output the whole thing. And then that goes into the filter. That's my next question. So it has 2 different filters. They can be run in series or parallel. So the signal can go into both filters at the same time, or go into one filter and then go into the other filter. And each filter has a ton of just different types, including some famous emulations of these other devices. But it certainly has all the classic, low pass, band pass, high pass, notch filter, all pass filter. It has different varieties of those, including formants to sound a little bit more vocal-like. It has this kind of strange reverb filter, which kind of makes it sound like the filtration of a room that's happening. It has rage, which is like a distortion or saturation filter. So, and it works just kind of basic. You have the cutoff. You have resonance, you have a drive on there, volume, and you can pan the filters, especially if you're using them in parallel. You can actually pan them to the side. Next thing is going to be envelopes, and the envelopes are actually pretty cool. These type of envelopes are down in the bottom. You also have kind of functions and random, which could affect things in the same way that the envelopes do. But it basically has a standard envelope for the amplifier. So I can make it kind of swell in if I want to, or I could make it just start right away. I could have it sustain if I put the If I put the release out a little bit, it can lengthen the kind of overall decay. I can move the sustain down to 0 also if I want to make something more percussive. There we go. And there's all these little adjustments to that. The second and third envelopes can then be routed to whatever you want. If you want to route them to the filter, it just becomes a question of going over to the assign of that envelope and actually dragging it over to the filter. So if I do that, I just can take it, drag it over to the cutoff, and then basically it is also, let me get a little bit more decay on here. And you can kind of see the filter is actually moving along with that envelope. If I made it really long, the sound actually dies out before it's even. Here, let me give it some sustain. You can see very slowly the cutoff move. If I don't want it quite that long, I can do it a little bit. There we go. And I could also release that so it would come back and a little slower as well. So there's the filters, and the envelopes, sorry. And then the modulation are all these other, I can use those envelopes to modulate pretty much anything I want. I could use, they have traditional LFOs. And again, if I want to, let's say I just want to LFO that cutoff. Well, now it's being controlled by two things. So what I can do is I can go to the envelope and actually delete that one. And now you can see it's just being controlled by the LFO. And so I have a rate. And the rate goes up well into audio rate modulation. Also, I can change the waveform, just by turning this. Or I can click on what the waveform starts at, but I'm getting, different kind of starting points and then moving it to different waves. So there's 3 of those, and I can use those. There's these other functions too that I can, have 1, 2, and 3, and I can just draw in, if I want to make them all sorts of things, or put in another point and then move it around and make a more complicated function, I could do that. And then assign that to any kind of parameter I want to. So that's the modulation. There's also random and things coming off of my keyboard, like the pitch or the velocity. So I've done the sounds already, so I need to wrap this up because I don't want to spend too long on this. But there's also a few more sections. There's full FX capabilities that I can get to and I can see. And here's standard delay and reverb, but I actually have lots more slots where I can put in all sorts of other types of effects, including chorus and phaser and other interesting things, bit crushers and things. And then finally, there's a sequence where I can actually create a sequence inside of Pigments. So I wouldn't have to sequence. I could just trigger it with a single MIDI note and it would sequence a whole bunch of things. So pitch, velocity, octaves, gate lengths, slides, and I can actually write those in and make it more complicated just with a single MIDI note input or simpler MIDI note input. So I hope that just helps a little bit. That probably went on too long. If you want to do a slight subset of that for your own project, you would get kind of 100%. That's all I'm looking for, is just to answer the questions and give me a little bit of taste of what the thing sounds like that you're demonstrating. So it doesn't have to be polished. It doesn't have to be pro in that way. Just the information itself has to be pro, but the video, you could take it with your phone or whatever you want. So I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you in class. Thanks.